Hi, I'm Ryan Dorsey.
You'll love it.
Exciting, isn't it?
A little insane after last week, so sorry.
I adopted a dog this week. I had to use a lint roller before I came here. White dog, lots of hair, black shirt.
Yeah, you've got first world problems.
Yeah, you know. But I got a new best friend.
That's great.
Welcome to this meeting of the Charter Review Special Committee. I'm Ryan Dorsey, Chair of the committee and representative of the city's 3rd City Council District. I am joined today by committee members, Vice Chair Dr. John Bullock of the 9th District.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Jermaine Jones of the 12th District. Zach Blanchard of the 11th District.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Odette Ramos of the 14th District.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We have our staff member, Ethan Navarre here. Hello, Ethan. Ethan says hello. We have representatives from the mayor's office and most of these other city agencies, all the city agencies, I don't know, lots of city agencies. And we will ask each of them to introduce themselves as we call on them to give their bill reports in due turn. We are here, first we're going to hear City Council Bill 260202, Charter Amendment, Department of Water and Wastewater, and then we're going to hear 260201, Charter Amendment, Parking Benefits District Local Fund. Who would like to present this bill? The mayor's office, Matt, who wants to? All right, we're going to go to Matt Garbark.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'm Matt Garbark, Director of the Department of Public Works. The Department of Public Works supports this bill. This is being introduced as an administration priority, which would create a new Department of Water and Wastewater. I know I've given many of you presentations on this, so I'll just go over sort of the highlights. By having a separate department, this is more in line with industry standards and best practices. When you look at public utilities throughout the country, there are two main organizational models. One is an independent authority. The other is a separate municipal agency. We are sort of an outlier in that we have a regional utility that is buried within a city agency. It's not just the agency, it's actually a bureau within the agency, the other bureau being the Bureau of Solid Waste. What this would do is that this would create a new department that would make the water and wastewater utilities separate from the Department of Public Works. We believe that this is going to help streamline finances, accounting, transparency, and overall accountability. It's going to do that in a couple of ways. First, it is going to help us account for utility costs much more effectively so that everything is accounted in one place. It is one department. The administrative costs now are shared between the general fund, which supports the Bureau of Solid Waste, and our utility funds. When we go to our annual, what's called true-up process with our county partners, we go through all of our expenses. And it can sometimes take a substantial amount of time to literally go through and unbraid all of the administrative costs to make sure that they're allocated appropriately between the utility and the general funds. Having a dedicated department where it is entirely utility funded, and there's no questions about that, is, we believe, going to make things better, more efficient, and help streamline things. We also think that by making this a separate department, we are going to be able to have stronger independent control and oversight of the utility finances. Part of the issue now is that there is a large process for how we manage those finances with the Department of Finance and other entities, and making it clear that this is a separate department with separate funds is going to help make that management and transparency better and more effective, which we believe is going to help increase our bond rating and make sure that we can leverage bond proceeds from the market. The reason why this is coming in now and not in 2028 or some other time is because we have faced financial issues with the wastewater utility. Fiscal 2025, the wastewater utility failed to meet its debt service coverage ratio. We never defaulted on anything, and we paid all of our bills. However, we did not maintain the cash reserves that were required by our bond covenants. What has happened, this has required that we retain a consultant to evaluate our utility, make recommendations on potential changes to ensure that we can meet that coverage. But it also prompted the debt rating agencies to rate our bond ratings. S&P has downgraded our bonds and has put us on a negative outlook. We have meetings coming up with Moody's and other bond rating agencies. One of the things that was noted was the complexity and sort of the buried nature of the utility finances deep inside a city agency and not having a strong, independent, executive level management structure. We believe that this is going to show goodwill and show that we are making very strong strides to move this forward and to ensure that our financial management of the utilities is on very sound footing. We also believe that this is going to help us during our regional collaboration. The City Comptroller is chairing the Regional Water Governance Task Force, and we do believe that this separation is going to help the conversations there on overall regional governance of this utility. The long-term plan is that this will take effect in January of 2029, giving over 2 years, should this pass in November, to actually implement this. We know it's going to take some time, and we know that we're going to have to be very thoughtful and very deliberate as we make this move. The other piece of this puzzle, which is not in this charter amendment, but is going to hopefully result from that, is the remaining functions of solid waste. The idea over the next 2 years is to turn that into a Department of Environmental Services, broaden the function of solid waste from more than just disposal, sanitation, collection, and focus on environmental management and protection. That is not the focus of this charter amendment. That is something that we are hoping to work on. Should this charter amendment be approved and passed by the voters, to come back in 2028 to really have a full built-out plan that looks at all of city government to develop a department that has strong environmental protection charge in it. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. And again, Department of Public Works stands in strong support of this charter amendment.
Thank you. I think, committee members, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to all of the reporting agencies first. And I'm going to go to city solicitor last, because the city solicitor's report, the law department report, is the only one that raised questions of potential amendment consideration or anything like that. So I'm going to ask about that as soon as they give their report. So first or next, we will go to the Department of Finance.
Hi, good afternoon. Bob Senemy, Deputy Finance Director. Just wanted to share a couple thoughts about our bill report. So overall, we support this bill. We think splitting this agency into two, provides the right focus that's needed for each side. It's two completely distinct operations, distinct and unique operations, and it needs the focus, on one side on the pure solid waste side and some of the functions that Director Garbark mentioned versus the water and wastewater and stormwater utilities. And so we do think that is the right thing to do. From a financial standpoint, in the budget, we actually already have these functions kind of split in terms of the funding source. So in the budget book, Service 660 admin is called Admin Solid Waste. That is the admin for just overseeing the solid waste side of the house, and that's all in the general fund. There's also a service number 670, which is called admin for the utility. That's all utility funded, water, wastewater, and stormwater. So we already have that split there, that the immediate oversight of those functions is split. There's also an additional service called admin for DPW at large. That piece is also split. So that service is allocated. So some of the costs go to the general fund, some of the costs go to the utility. So in theory, if you split this department, you could take the general fund stuff and just say that's solid waste. You could take everything else and say that is utility. However, I just want to acknowledge that when you do this kind of split, you know, we're going to have to work with DPW and see if there are additional costs. There could be additional costs that are needed to kind of, you know, get to the intent of what we're trying to do. We haven't done a full fiscal analysis on that yet, but our interest would be in working with DPW and trying to make, if there are any new costs, just to make the new structure as cost-effective as is humanly possible. And again, just want to stress that there are already allocated costs in the department that go to either solid waste or utility. So in theory, you could just split that up and call it a day and be done with it. But obviously, if you're creating a new organization, we want to make sure it's staffed appropriately and can meet the mission of what it's intended to do.
Thank you. We'll go to Office of the Comptroller.
Good afternoon, Casey Kelleher from the Office of the Comptroller. We are favorable for this charter amendment. Some background, the Comptroller has had the pleasure of being the chair of the Baltimore Regional Water Governance Task Force from 23 to 24, and is now the chair of, gotta read out the full thing, Baltimore Regional Water Governance Model Work Group. Acronym there. I'm just going to refer to both as the task force and the work group. These bodies are made up of individuals appointed by the mayor, Baltimore County executive, governor, to work on what it looks like for us to share the resource that is our water utility. Some of the members of that work group and the previous task force have submitted testimony in support of this charter amendment as well. And the chair is operating the work group under the assumption that if this is approved, assuming that this is approved by voters, how do we continue to build strong collaboration between Baltimore City and Baltimore County to support our water utility? So the work group right now is split into two committees. The governance committee is working on identifying strategies to improve how water, wastewater, and stormwater operations are managed within and between Baltimore City and Baltimore County. And the finance and funding committee is trying to also look at the funding side of that, especially within the existing institutional framework established by the interjurisdictional agreements. And also clarifying how the current system operates in regards to long-term planning and equity. That work is ongoing, and they're hoping to have a report in the fall. I want to flag that as a reason why the comptroller is so supportive of this is that the task force from 24, their major recommendation was for this charter amendment to happen, and the work group is trying to carry on that legacy and build out some recommendations for public works in the city and the county to work on. So in closing, we're super supportive of this charter amendment and request a favorable report on 260202. Thank you.
Thank you. Department of Planning.
Good afternoon, Sarah Parnell, Baltimore City Department of Planning. Similar to the Department of Finance, as we review the capital budget for the Department of Public Works, it's already divided in terms of the utilities and solid waste. And so we are favorable, we have a favorable position on this charter amendment. We would just work with both the new Department of Water and Wastewater and the, I guess, environmental services for the public works side. And it wouldn't really change our process as we already work with both of those. They do separate presentations to the Planning Commission already, and we kind of work with them uniquely based on their unique funding sources. So we have a favorable position on this amendment.
Thank you. Law Department.
Thank you, Chair Dorsey. Jeff Hochstetler with the Law Department. The Law Department can approve the bill for form and legal sufficiency. However, there were just two notes in the report for the council's consideration. One is whether or not the Director of Water and Wastewater should in the charter explicitly have a deputy, and to explain that the deputy then is the acting director in the absence of the director. That's how it currently is in DPW. That doesn't appear to have been replicated in the new language. So something that we're just pointing out. And then there's this removal of the word drain from the language in discussing sewers and the new operations of the new department. That is contained in the current section 34 of Article 7, where it's taken from, and also in a few other places like the public local law and in our express powers over sewers. So just wanted to point that out and see if it was intentional. Again, these aren't necessarily legal problems, but wanted to point it out for council's consideration.
Great, thank you. I'm going to speak to that second one because I had something to do with it. Reading the law, as I understand the construction of law to work, each individual word in a list of words needs to carry its own meaning. And when reviewing the preliminary drafts of this bill, thank you to the administration for working so collaboratively on this and asking for perspective. I looked at that, where are those 3-word phrases? Where it says sewer, it said sewers, drains, and something else?
Yeah, you can take a look at section 34 of Article 7 currently.
34, right. The department shall have charge of the construction, operation, and maintenance of all drains, sewers, and sewage disposal facilities. Yeah. I can understand how these 3 words or phrases mean things that are independent, and whereas sewers, I think very clearly means the things that carry sewage from our homes and our businesses and our properties to a sewage disposal facility where it's processed, that drains are something that's, I think, intrinsically linked to stormwater. And we wanted to be really clear that this is not a bill that's carrying stormwater over into this new thing. That when I think of drains, I think of drain inlets on streets that are part of that stormwater system, and wanted to be clear that we were not conflating the two things by including those terms if they all need to carry separate meanings, the way I understand it.
So if drains are currently under the purview of DPW, but that section is being removed and sent over to DWW without drains, is there some intention that drains stay within DPW?
If drains are part of the stormwater system, then they should be staying with DPW.
I thought that we hadn't had any discussions about this yet. Excuse me, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I had a question at the council luncheon because I'm really concerned about where storm goes. And the answer from the director was, we don't know yet. We're going to have that discussion. Because I actually think storm should be in the new agency.
Okay, I'm gonna, let's.
I have another question for Law.
Okay, I'm gonna touch on my couple of things here with law first, and then we'll come back to that as a general discussion then.
Thank you.
For relating to the other note in your report about a deputy director, was an amendment draft requested for that?
This would be up to the sponsor to request this if that's what they wanted.
Okay. Can I ask the mayor's office if you have an opinion on that? Or Public Works, if you have an opinion on this? I'll say the executive department's article of the charter is something that I would really like for us to generally rework for the 2028 election. The kind of restating of certain things over and over again for each executive department that's laid out in the charter, where instead of each one saying, this department has a director, and this department has a deputy director, and their salaries are to be provided for in the chart, and they are nominated and appointed through this process. Like, we could just state it once that each executive agency in the charter here has a director, a deputy director, salaries, these things once up front, and then dramatically abbreviate the length and complexity of, and superfluity of things throughout the executive department's article. So to me, it's kind of 6 to 1, half a dozen the other, whether we throw one more in here now and then take it away in consolidating things in a separate 2028 election, but I'm happy to go other way. Any perspective from Public Works or the Mayor's Office?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Nina Themelis, Director of Government Relations for Mayor Scott. Given that the effective date for this charter amendment would be January 1st, 2029, the administration had been imagining that the work of any additional charter amendments, as well as further defining the new department and the other elements that will need to be worked out upon that effective date, will take place over the course of the next 2 years. And so to your point, given that the agency itself will not exist until January 2029, I don't believe at this time it's necessary to further define that, but that it would be something that we would look to make sure is in place before the department is actually in place.
I'm satisfied with that. Okay, then I think we ought to have a general discussion here for a moment. I want to be cognizant of the time of one particular person, Ms. Keisha Powell, the general manager and CEO of WSSC, who's here with us to speak in favor of this bill. Before we have a whole lot more in-depth discussion that could take up a lot of time, I'd like to prioritize Ms. Powell's time to give her testimony on it. Ms. Powell?
Mr. Chair, sorry.
Yes.
She's online.
She's online. I see. I see her now. Okay, let's go to Ms. Powell online here. She should be able to unmute herself. And if she has a camera, she can be on screen. Ms. Powell, are you with us?
Hello?
Hello, Ms.
This is
Powell.
Keisha
How you
Powell.
doing?
Hello, I'm doing well, thank you. I apologize, I wasn't aware that I would be allowed to speak. If I could have just one moment to get my testimony in front of me,
Oh, sure.
and I'm not sure about the camera. Okay. Thank you for the opportunity to share. This is personally a full circle moment.
Ms. Powell, are you
There it
speaking?
is.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, thank you so much. I support this charter revision. I wrote to support the Resolution 26-0202 Charter Amendment, Department of Water and Wastewater, as a member of the Regional Water Governance Work Group established by the Maryland General Assembly for the purpose of evaluating governance options for the City of Baltimore's regional water and wastewater system. I have participated in meetings regarding the future governance, management, operations, and maintenance of the system. Our focus as a work group has been the importance of ensuring that it remains accountable and in the best position to be responsive to customer needs with equity as an imperative. Having served as Bureau Head of the City of Baltimore's Bureau of Water and Wastewater, I know firsthand the limitations and challenges the Bureau has experienced, which are inherent in the current structure. This resolution represents an essential step toward a structure that will achieve operational efficiencies for improved service delivery. The City of Baltimore's water and wastewater enterprise represents the second largest utility in the state of Maryland and among the 15 largest water utilities in the United States out of more than 50,000 utilities, a stature that should be reflected in its structure. As a peer water utility, the Bureau of Water and Wastewater must address similar regulatory, operational, and financial challenges, including balancing affordability with making necessary investments in infrastructure and the workforce. The work group's discussions have highlighted these unique operational and infrastructure challenges that Baltimore's public utilities are facing. Creating a dedicated Department of Water and Wastewater recognizes the complexities of these responsibilities and provides clearer accountability, which will allow greater focus on maintaining safe, reliable, and affordable water and wastewater service for customers throughout the region. This charter amendment is a practical change that will strengthen utility governance and ensure that Baltimore's water and wastewater system is positioned to overcome future challenges. Respectfully, I urge the council to pass Resolution 26-0202, Charter Amendment, Department of Water and Wastewater, onto the voters of Baltimore City. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Powell. Before we come back to our agencies, do any of our committee members have questions for Ms. Powell? Thank you for your time, Ms. Powell. Can we talk about the matter of inclusion or non-inclusion of stormwater in this new entity?
Mr. Chair, if I might, I want to back up real quick on this issue of the word drain.
Councilwoman Ramos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Hofstetler, you had said that the word drain exists in this context of wastewater in the public local law. Is that correct?
It does.
But, so is it in the context of storm? Because there are drains in our sewer system. Like so the reason I ask is obviously we were the very first system in the entire country that separated wastewater from storm, right? And that's a good thing. I'm glad we did it. We're ahead of a lot of other places. And so I guess the question is whether that word drain was intended for the stormwater side or just because there's drains in the sewer system. Because my understanding in reading the charter and having these discussions about storm was that the charter was actually silent about stormwater.
That's my recollection. I mean, we can certainly do another search, but there's no reference, at least to my recent knowledge, that stormwater isn't mentioned in the charter.
Do you think that in the public local law, that the intent was to include the word drains relative to stormwater?
The current language that discusses drains, wastewater, sewers in the charter governing DPW exists pretty much in that same verbiage in the public local law as well. It's just sort of restated in the charter.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the public local law is also silent, if you will, on storm?
I'd have to do another check, but as far as I recall, it's mainly just the same language about drains and wastewater, correct?
Okay. So that's helpful to know. I appreciate, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for indulging me on that part of the conversation, because my understanding from DPW and the mayor's office was that this would only be about water and wastewater. I have a lot of concerns about where storm lands, but that we wanted to have a discussion about that separately, and that we could, because it wasn't dictated in the charter, or now we're hearing in public local law, that we could actually have that discussion about where stormwater lands. The reason that I want stormwater to be, and I have two big storm areas, so I'm not a stormwater expert, but I pretend to be, and it is, it's the same chart of procurement, it's a lot of the same engineers, it's a lot of the same, it's gonna be so different than this environmental services piece that's gonna really be about solid waste, zero waste, et cetera, that it seems to me it needs to go there, but I'm understanding that we have to pass this today or tomorrow or next week, and so we don't have enough time to have that discussion, and so we were gonna have it separately as to where it would go relative to the code. So I guess I'm just trying to see whether or not this word drain actually has that kind of implication that I think Mr. Chair was trying to figure out.
And Councilwoman, if I may briefly, thanks to the, the internet and word searches, public local law does mention storm water, sewers, and drains in a couple of places. The whole makeup of the public local law around this issue is, it's old. It talks about a sewerage commission, which doesn't exist anymore, et cetera. So I'm not entirely sure the legislative history of why that exact language wasn't transferred to the charter language. But I think you would look at practice at that point, and it's been DPW that has had charge of stormwater sewers and wastewater sewers.
Right,
Mr. Chair.
so are you saying then that the word drain is an issue?
I think that taking the word drain out makes it less clear where stormwater would fall.
I'm going to let Ben chime in here.
Ben Guthorn, Director of Legislative Reference. I just want to clarify that the public local law provisions that speak to water, wastewater, sewer, all predate our home rule charter that was created in 1918. It's 1898, 1904, and 1912. So the provisions in there would not be bearing necessarily on our express powers, which are stated in Article 2 of our current charter.
And Article 2 of the charter in section 31 does mention to establish, maintain, operate, and control sewers, drains, and sewage disposal facilities. And that is the language that was sort of copied into the current authority for DPW, and that word drain is now being taken out when it's transferred to Department of Water and Wastewater. So now that provision for drains would not exist in either DPW or Department of Water and Wastewater at the current.
But it is in Article 2 of the,
It's in our express powers.
in Article 2 specifically, which we absolutely cannot change in any way other than going to the General Assembly.
Yes, it gives us, yes, that authority over drains. Again, stormwater is not in there, but drains is in there. And if the intention was to clarify which department would have stormwater authority after this passes, I mean, presumably you could do that by ordinance as well, if we already have this express power.
Right, which is what I thought
Yeah.
that's what I thought the plan was. So I just didn't want to confuse things with this word. I mean, again, if you have a sewer system, you're going to have drains. So I don't know that it's expressly saying that it's about stormwater if we have to work out the stormwater thing later.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Matt, sorry.
So,
Director Garbark.
No problem. So originally, the storm sewer is a sewer. It was a storm sewer and the sanitary sewer.
Right.
And colloquially, we have called it the storm drain. So if we say, we usually, when I give budget presentations, however many miles of storm drains, although they are separate systems, they are connected. There are structured outfalls that were deliberately built in to allow for overflows to, sadly, we're paying the price now, go into our streams and our storm drains.
That's true.
The storm water utility was created only about 10, 12 years ago. That is based off of impervious surface with stormwater flow. Now, when you're looking at the storm sewer system, there are lots of overlaps with the wastewater system. We have pumping stations that are maintained by our wastewater facilities division. So it is a component of the wastewater when it is dealing with some of those infrastructure pieces. But the regulatory piece with stormwater review, with some of these other issues that are very much an environmental services function are different than what we used to do. The wastewater utility used to pay for all of the storm drains and the sanitary lines as well. if that clarifies anything.
Yeah, when I want to come back, I want to speak on that for a second, ask Bob about this. For clarity, Bob, in your testimony, you talked about the potential to just say, general fund goes over to the solid waste side of things, and the utility fund goes over to this new entity, but they're actually three separate utilities, right? There's a drinking water, treated water utility, a sewer utility, and a stormwater utility. So it's not as clean. If you have an entity that's handling water and wastewater for the purpose of saying, we have ratepayers that are in the city and we have ratepayers that are outside of the city, and we want to have this one thing that uniquely governs and operates that thing because we need everybody to be on the same playing field, whether they're in the city and out of the city, in terms of the portion of cost sharing that each carries and rate setting being understood and agreed upon to be fair for everybody, that only those utilities are going to go over there and should be separated into that thing from this other thing that's uniquely city, our stormwater system. It's not, there's no part of, like, Carroll County isn't paying for our stormwater here in the city.
Although I think they should be.
Maybe. But can you just, for clarity, come back to this point about general fund versus utility? It's not as clean necessarily.
Yeah, sure. So I think, you know, within the budget currently, all the stuff I'm calling utility, it still is broken out by fund about which costs we assign to the stormwater, which costs we assign to wastewater, and which costs we assign to water. So, you know, there are certain positions, of course, many positions are dedicated to kind of one system or not, right? There are some administrative costs that you have to allocate among each of those three funds. So what I described earlier is you kind of split the general fund stuff off, you split all the utility stuff off. Even within that new entity, there's still going to have to be allocations of which costs are assigned to which utility, stormwater, wastewater, water. So I don't think it would really, I mean, if you just split it off simply today, it really wouldn't change that much versus what is done today. What I was referring to more is that at that very top level of overhead, you have some costs that are allocated. And so it's easy to allocate the cost of a person to a system or a side. It's not easy to actually cut a person in half and say one half goes to the one side and one half goes the other. So when I say that there could be additional costs, you know, you have some that are allocated a little bit. You might have to have one person on each side doing that same task. So, but on the utility split from the general fund, I still think that could live exactly like it does today.
Okay. Thank you. Councilman Jones?
Yes, just had one quick question for the director. Kind of get it just for the general public. Well, first, thanks for the explanation on what the bill's going to do. But for the general public, if you can explain why there needs to be a charter amendment in order to accomplish this, rather than you all just kind of make the decision within the administration, I think, just to make that clear.
Absolutely.
And
yes.
what in the charter is being changed at the request.
Yes. So as you all know, the charter is a foundational document, sets up the structure of city government. It currently has the Department of Public Works listed in the charter. The Department of Public Works used to be, bar none, the largest city agency. It controlled almost any operational component. Going back in time, it had transportation, general services, all were different bureaus. You look at other municipalities, local governments, and there are, especially smaller counties, a single DPW that does everything from facilities to fleet to highways to everything. Over the years, different functions have been broken out into standalone departments. Department of Transportation was established in 2003. Department of General Services that focuses on fleet and facilities was established in 2009. What is remaining in the charter is for DPW is the Bureau of Water and Wastewater and the Bureau of Solid Waste. So what this would do is in that section that describes and charges the Department of Public Works, it would remove references to water and wastewater and put them in a newly created department. So technically, DPW would still remain, but it would only have the solid waste function. That's why the intent is to work over the next couple years on a new environmental services function so that DPW will basically be dissolved into its functional components, and which will create greater efficiency.
Thank you, Director. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Vice Chair Bullock. Councilman Blanchard. I'm going to ask one more question. Just why do this now if we have an implementation date of January of 2029 and there's other work to be done between now and then anyway? Why?
Yes.
Why not wait on this?
So a couple of things. The first is, as I mentioned, our wastewater utility is looking at some financial difficulties. We raised rates fairly significantly last year to cover the increasing costs. Our chemical costs are skyrocketing, and the costs for drying our solids are increasing as well. We've also seen a reduction, a significant reduction in collections, and that has generated an increase in bad debt. All of these pressures have come to bear, and on top of all that, we've invested $250 million just over the last 3 years in the wastewater plants to bring them into compliance. All of that has brought pressures on the wastewater enterprise fund where we failed to meet the debt service coverage ratio. That resulted in a bond downgrade. If we do not recover that, if we do not stabilize, it could result in an additional downgrade. At some point, we will potentially be out of investment grade, which is going to make our capital program, which is critical for our modified consent decree, absolutely untenable if we cannot borrow at reasonable costs. One of the things that was noted by the rating agencies as well as our bond counsel is having governance, having very clear, very straightforward, very strong governance of the utility was going to help stabilize this and help us restore our bond rating. We would like to do this because the close of the fiscal year is just around the corner. We are going to have our bonds reviewed again once that happens, and we want to be able to show that we have made some very strong changes at a very high level, very clear level about the governance and financial oversight of this utility. The other piece is there has been a lot of discussions about the governance, ownership, accountability, all of that with the city-owned utility. This is something the city owns. The city has owned it since its creation. This, we believe, is going to show that the city of Baltimore is taking the lead in ensuring the governance reflects the 21st century and a modern utility so that we can stop any discussion from outside about who actually owns this wonderful system. So the idea is to hopefully clarify once and for all, the city is intending to remain in control and ownership of this system. It is not going to be privatized, and that we are going to be successful for the future.
That sounds to me like we have an urgent concern and also something that we can reasonably expect to be an ongoing concern, to where, again, I'm wondering, like, why would we not want this to be implemented 30 days after the upcoming general election instead of waiting another 2 years, especially if the transition is, in a way, just one of, like, rethinking how our city's agency assets and personnel are deployed day to day, or how we think of them.
So you're absolutely right. That's obviously a decision for the council. Our reasoning was we're going to have a couple of shifts. If this happens, it's going to have to be done quickly. We know there's going to be, how to pull things apart, how to create different positions. That's obviously can take a little bit of time. But also you're going to create this strange existing DPW. And DPW is only going to have solid waste at that point. The idea then is to come back and then dissolve DPW, create this environmental services. So there's going to be multiple transitional steps, which we thought internally that showing the intent, the charter change, is the real important piece, and then working out these internal steps to minimize the disruption and minimize all of these different moving parts so that we can change sort of right at the same time and have the two final departments go side by side. That was the intent.
Thank you. Councilwoman Ramos?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you don't mind, I'd like to go back to this word drains. If we take the word drains out, like is proposed, does that preclude us that if we decide to put stormwater in this agency, that then we couldn't do that?
I don't believe so.
Okay. And so because I understood your point in that drains is already in all these other documents, and we do have drains in our sewer system, as you just described, so we could put it in to be clear and consistent with all of our other documents, but it also doesn't say that we have to, I think storm should go here, but obviously we have a lot more need to have some conversations about it. But if we keep the word drains in, that doesn't preclude us also from moving storm elsewhere. Is that correct?
I think that's correct. All it does is may raise a question of why the word drain was removed and what specific power may or may not have been removed from DPW to the new department. But because all of this exists in our express powers, unless there's an explicit conflict with this charter language, some of those duties can be moved around.
So would you be okay if, because I would like to, it sounds like we need a lot more conversations about storm and to get much more technical about where storm needs to go. So because of the acute nature of needing to get this passed, we just can't make that decision today. But I just want to make sure that whatever we do with this word drains, doesn't preclude us from doing one or the other with stormwater, whether it stays in the Department of Wastewater and Water or the Department of Environmental, whatever we're going to call it.
I don't see how that would preclude moving around that duty. I know there's another hearing on this for a voting session. I'm happy to clarify that in the meantime.
Would you mind, if we're not voting today, would you mind clarifying that for us so that we can decide what we're going to do with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
That would be super helpful.
Like I said, this was not a legal deficiency, but it was at least an ambiguity I wanted to point out. So I can look into that immediately.
Mr. Chair.
Please.
Our understanding was also that it would not preclude that, given the interest and the discussion that still has to happen about where this locates. My understanding was the sewer is a sewer and stormwater is written into our code, so that it would not necessarily need to be in the charter specifically. But obviously the law department can provide information. But that was my understanding of this.
Yeah, I guess, I don't want to get too tripped up on the word drain, but I do think, if it's going to have some impact, we should know whatever that impact is going to be, given the fact that we still have some decisions to make in the code. And that the word stormwater doesn't appear, I don't think it appears at all in the charter, frankly. So that's all, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the discussion.
Do we have anything else from any of the committee members for the agencies before we go on to public testimony? Okay, do we have a sign-in sheet for public testimony in person? Did anybody sign up to testify here in person? We don't have anybody signed up on the sign-in sheet. I don't see any hands raised here. Do you have anybody signed up to testify online? We do not have anybody signed up to testify online. Does the mayor's office wish to say anything more on this before I recess us until we come back to this a week from today?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I don't have anything extensive to say. I want to thank the committee for your thoughtful questions. Want to just again reemphasize that no language is being taken out of the charter. especially concerning the existing prohibition on privatization, and that we're really just trying to streamline functions as a result of the ongoing work of the Baltimore Regional Water Governance Task Force and now work group. And just a reminder that the work of that work group does continue for another about year and a half, and that there are likely going to be some robust conversations that will continue to happen within that public body over that time period. But that we want to just thank you for consideration of the amendment today and look forward to working with you if the amendment is passed and then goes to the voters on the actual work over the next 2.5 years before the effective date. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we are going to recess this bill for now, and we're going to come back to it 1 week from today. We will take a few minutes recess here to let everybody who doesn't need to be here for the next bill to make their way, and have a nice rest of your day. Thank you. Hi, everybody. We are back here. Charter Review Special Committee. We are now going to hear from Councilman Blanchard presenting Council Bill 260201, a bill entitled An Ordinance Concerning Charter Amendment, Parking Benefits District Local Fund. Councilman Blanchard, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to start with a shout out to Councilman Jones. He just left, but I guess I'll do it anyway. So Councilman Jones has a great line. I've heard him talk about this in the neighborhoods we share together about we spent a long time trying to be a great county, and we should really be trying to be a great city. And when I think about something that cannot be replicated in subdivision development, being able, in the place you live, to walk down to, particularly in the city, right? Historic row home retail, your restaurants, shops, stores, bars, having all these things within a really close distance of you. It's not just convenient, and it's not just nice from a, walking ability, not needing to get around via car, all that type of stuff. It drives people's sense of place where they live, and it drives people's sense of what a neighborhood is. And it also, there's a sense of place, there's also a sense of social connectedness, and I think that anyone who lives that has the opportunity to live near a neighborhood commercial corridor knows what I'm talking about, right? The place where the public space that you can walk down in the regular course of your day, and you see other people who you know from the neighborhood, right? And it's a really beautiful aspect of having this opportunity, and it's a really great thing about living in a dense city environment. At the same time, a lot of our commercial corridors in the city, I would say probably most of them, are not thriving. The bones are there, but we have challenges with very strong challenges with retail vacancy. We have all sorts of challenges with spaces being clean and green and attractive, and things that people just feel good about being in. Challenges with safety, all types of these issues. And I will just also briefly note, because I know I've heard some concern from a couple of my colleagues, both in the lunch on Monday as well as afterwards, and I think this is a concern that I've heard or alluded to from the administration a couple times, is that there is some sort of inherent risk of this being an inequitable opportunity to better invest in the neighborhood commercial corridors across the city, which people would informally refer to as main streets, not as in the Main Streets America designated places, but as in the places with the shops and restaurants and all those types of things near where you live. I'll note that there's 9 main streets in the city. It's all official main streets. it's already a fairly diverse group. The most recent one is Park Heights. When I think about other places in the city that should, I think, have a Main Street, as Councilman Bullock and I talked about, West Baltimore Street in his district is a great example of it. East Monument Street is another, I think it was at some point in the past, if I'm not mistaken, but you walk down, it certainly feels like a Main Street. South Hanover Street in Brooklyn is another obvious example of this. These are all over the city. They're spread out equitably and naturally because it's sort of a natural aspect of the city, and if they feel tired or struggling or disadvantaged, it's because the neighborhoods that they're in are, for racial and class and just other reasons, disadvantaged. And so I want to say that things that provide more funding opportunity and help strengthen and reinforce neighborhood commercial corridors in our city are things that we should be thinking very, very rigorously and serious about how we can do. I really do think this is one of the things that is a unique proposition of city life that we have, that outside of a couple of cutesy small towns, right, like you really can't do outside of a place like Baltimore. And so this is why for the last 4 years I've been a really big enthusiast for the Parking Benefits District. I know Director Little from the Parking Authority couldn't make it today, but I checked. And February 3rd of 2023 was the first conversation that he and I had about Parking Benefits District. So I really have been on this train for a while. That was before I was thinking about running for office. I met Councilman Ramos when I was trying to figure out how this would be possible. I met the Senate President trying to figure out how this would be possible, right? So this is something I've been really big enthusiast for a while. I've been in office for a year and a half. If I've been a big enthusiast for this long of a time, why are we having the hearing now, several weeks before we have to get this to the state, right, for certification of the charter amendment? Well, because we were having these conversations and been having these conversations with the mayor's office since the very beginning of the term. And the idea came up that we would have the non-lapsing fund provision through ordinance put into the charter amendment. And so I would not need to go the route of having this as its own specific charter amendment. We could address it via ordinance. And obviously that was pulled out a couple weeks ago. And so we've been scrambling to try to get this into the 2026, this in as its own 2026 charter amendment. The double whammy of this is also there was, I guess, some state legislative change or something or other that now requires all these things to be signed by the mayor and out by very early in July, when we thought it was going to be later in July. So we're being really, if it feels like we're being rushed, we are being rushed, but bear with me because I really think that this is some pretty good reasons for being in the position that we're in now. And lastly, I want to say I did have the chance, I think we got the agency's responses around 9:15 this morning. I did have the chance to read through them. I appreciate them. For the agencies who are opposed in its current stance, I just want to say, and I'll say this again when we're going through the agency reports and whatnot, but the devil is in the details. The details should be in the ordinance. The devil is in the details. The details should be in the ordinance. There may be one or two things, and we've already, I think, addressed them with law, but for finance, particularly, and for DOT and the Parking Authority, there may be a couple things that we need to address in the next week as an amendment to the charter amendment legislation. But I really think that by and large, for the most part, all of the concerns, all of the, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? What about this? All of that should be, the right place to do that is in the ordinance, right? This is just the creation of the fund. So I would, I think, encourage the administration as we're talking through this to just kind of have the question of, is this, it's good to bring up the concerns now, and I appreciate them, but is this something that has to be addressed with the fund charter amendment, or is this something that can be addressed in the subsequent legislation? And my read is that most, if not all of those things can be effectively addressed in the legislation. So I look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Blanchard. I'll just say, as somebody who has read Donald Shoup, who's like, kind of the godfather of parking policy, like whoever was like, what I should deep dive into is parking policy. What would be thrilling is if somebody really broke down the impacts of parking policy. But it turned out it needed to be done. And there's a great book on this called The High Cost of Free Parking. And, it generally talks about the problem of parking minimum laws. Thank you, Councilman Blanchard, for leading on that. It talks about the importance of high turnover or appropriate turnover of parking in business districts, and that the most effective way that you want to aim for there to be one parking space in any given area, not 10 parking spaces, but not 0 parking spaces, one parking space turning over every so often so that people aren't spending time driving and driving and driving looking for a parking space, and so at the same time customers aren't staying longer than they would if they were paying an appropriate rate for the value of the parking that they're taking up. So setting the rates of parking at a level that is sufficient to manage the demand that exists for that parking area, and that at the same time, the business owners themselves can often bristle at the mere idea that there should be a cost for people to park on the street near their businesses, that traditionally many business owners have thought, well, the best thing for my business is if people can come here and pay nothing to be able to come to my business, but often that means that people come and park in front of their business and then are there for 10 minutes and then go somewhere else and don't come back for 3 hours, and there could be 15 other people trying to come to their business and wish they had that parking space available, and that might not be the case if a person had to pay an acceptable or an appropriate fee to use that parking space, something that actually manages that demand. And that when convincing or attempting to convince business owners of the benefit to them and value to them of their being paid parking in front of and near and around their business, one of the ways that they can become convinced is if some of that revenue, and this is directly out of the High Cost of Free Parking Donald Shoup playbook, is that if some of that revenue generated by those meters comes back to directly, tangibly benefit the business district that they exist in to make it better so that more people want to come there in the first place. And the creation of parking benefits districts is exactly that. This is directly out of the playbook on how to have good parking policy. And without this charter amendment, and without the ability to just simply do this in ordinance as a matter of good policy, which it is, without this charter amendment, we can't possibly implement this best practice in parking policy and parking demand management. And so I really appreciate having a colleague on the council here who is trying to help us to be able to do what we know works best for Main Streets. Also note, it's a benefit district similar to special benefits districts that already exist in the city, and that people who live in a certain area want that area to thrive and be wonderful. Business owners who operate in an area want that place to thrive and be wonderful and attractive. And the tool that we have right now for allowing, for encouraging that makes those business owners and those commercial property owners, and in many cases also nearby residential property owners, essentially solely responsible for that increment of funding that goes to the benefits district that helps to do those things, like the Downtown Partnership and like the Midtown Benefits District and the Charles Village Benefits District. These all take money directly from the property owners of that area, as if the property owners should be the only ones that are responsible for funding that greening or cleaning or nicening up of the area, when I think it's perfectly reasonable and logical that the people who benefit from being able to come to that area to enjoy that area should be shouldering some portion of that as well, and that it's perfectly reasonable to think that the people who are driving their cars to that area from some other area is the most direct and logical way to derive that little bit of revenue from anybody in addition to the people who have already invested in owning property in that area. And so this is an utterly reasonable and logical supplement to that system that we already have. So I love this policy, and I'm so glad that we as a committee have talked about the concept as much as we have at this point up over the last more than a half a year of this committee's convenings. And so I'm just, thank you for indulging me as I add my comments here to the sponsors. Vice Chair Bullock.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for providing some additional context. Thank you, Councilman Blanchard, for walking us through this. I know that you're going to go over the amendments later on, but one that stuck out to me, I was just curious about, if you could talk about briefly, there's a commission that you want to establish. Can you talk about the rationale for that? I'm just curious.
So, thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. And this is, I think, an idea that Councilman Ramos had flagged for us as an amendment. I am looking forward to the conversation, to having a conversation around that amendment specifically, and if that makes sense. My actual initial disposition, my thought on this is that the money the revenue should be basically allotted by ordinance, in the sense of, the example I've given before was 50% of what generates in this catchment stays in the catchment, the other 50% gets distributed across the other parking benefits districts in the city. You know, you gotta figure out how exactly to do it, but so I think having that sort of my disposition is, say, having like just a mathematical, here's where the money goes, and then there will be some sort of, whether it's a Main Street or an arts district or maybe Southwest Partnership or you know, whoever the entity would be that would sort of decide how that money needs to be used in the hyperlocal space. But I know with some of our other funds, we do have commissions, and so I'd be interested in hearing from colleagues as to what people think about which way would work better for that. My default would be to not have it, I think, but I do think it's important to have a conversation. I want to know what that would look like.
No, appreciate that. Look forward to hearing more.
Councilwoman Ramos?
Yeah, thank you. I'll speak to that a little bit. One of our other colleagues in another meeting brought up the equity issue. And so I thought that and I think, you know, to the councilman's point, putting the formula in ordinance makes sense. But that, you know, we first needed to put in the ordinance, like, which agency would be staffing this. So I think you have that in here now. And also that for the reparations fund, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, some of the others that were voter approved have this commission for an additional layer of accountability, but also if, for instance, what the councilman was talking about, where half would stay in the area in which it was earned and half goes into this other pot, you know, how's that other pot distributed? Is it You know, do we change it every so often? I mean, that kind of stuff still needs to be worked out, but that would need to be done, I think, in a commission sort of way. But I mean, I'm open to the discussion, but that was the idea, as I had made some suggestions.
That's helpful, thank you.
Councilman Jones?
Guess, this is for, I guess, sponsor of the bill, Councilman Blanchard. Has there been any, work done regarding, or any numbers crunched on, like projections on what could potentially, I know no boundaries have been driven or set yet, but approximately what some of these districts could take in, especially after dividing it?
Yeah, thank you, Councilman Jones. And I think it would be good to take to the question of like, how much revenue are we talking? One, it depends on how you go about doing this, right? And so I think just to clarify, I think the right way, the Parking Authority had brought up, I think, some concern here in their agents report, but I think the right way to do it, I think we're basically in agreement on what the chair alluded to of, you want to have the amount high enough so that there's 1 to 2 available parking spaces on the lot. Because if you don't, on a block, because if you don't have that, then that means you are undervaluing the value of the space, and that means people trying to park and go and shop or do whatever in the area they don't have the place to park, right? So they're circling around looking and all those sorts of things. So I think that there's an opportunity to increase the increment where appropriate. We certainly have a decent number of areas in the city where it's 50 cents an hour, but that's never available because the value is higher than what is being charged, you know? So I think there's an opportunity around the increment. Depending on the nature of the area, certainly, you know, I live in Federal Hill. The peak demand for parking in Federal Hill's Main Street is late in the evening. It actually is probably like around midnight to 1. So in areas where you have a large nightlife area, that you may want to extend the hours. A lot of areas, just for historic reasons, I think, don't charge on Sundays. The meters aren't running on Sundays, even though there's oftentimes plenty of demand for parking on Sundays. So that'd be an option. I think there's a lot of different ways to actually go about, or you could put new meters in an area where, hey, there's plenty of business here. It actually makes sense. We may not have had the political support do that in the past, but now that there's some opportunity for the, you know, surrounding area to get a benefit from it, maybe we could have, you know, new meters here. So all that to say that answering the question of like what scale of how much revenue you'd be generating depends on how you go about that. I think I've looked at it most closely in my district, and because historically I was looking at this from a Main Street specific lens, I was looking at how much the parking meters overlapped with the Main Street districts across the city. And so it happens that there's a couple main streets that have most of the meters. Fells Point does actually not have a lot of parking meters in the Main Street area, coincidentally, right? So sort of random. Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's a good argument here. But like on Pennsylvania Avenue, that Main Street area, you'd be looking at probably low 5-digit amount in an annual year based off of maybe $20,000 to $30,000, depending on how you strategize doing that. In Federal Hill, you're looking at probably a couple $100,000, right? So there's a gap, right, between what the different areas would have. Downtown would be probably, there's a possibility that if we did this in downtown the right way, it would be larger than everywhere else in the city almost combined. So it's hard to, a lot of variables, but I could definitely see this being a low $1 to $2 million a year of consistent revenue without a whole bunch of new meters and stuff being created in places don't have it. I think it would be pretty easy to get to that amount.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Ramos?
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the sponsor, correct me if I'm wrong, but your thought about how we would raise the money is not to take from what's currently going to the general fund, but it is to maybe add 25 cents to a 50-cent meter, or add a couple of hours. And so like what we're talking about now is like the baseline, and then anything over that, that we decide to do by ordinance would go into the fund. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Councilwoman. I have always envisioned this as a net neutral to the general fund. So it would not be taking anything away from the money being received into the general fund.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll go to our agency reports. Starting with the Law Department.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jeff Hochstetler with the Law Department. As explained in Law's bill report, there were a number of issues in the first reader version of this bill. I won't necessarily list all of those here. We did work with the sponsor to come up with some pretty comprehensive amendments, which I believe will be discussed in a moment, and we can approve those for form and legal sufficiency. But those would need, something substantially similar to that would need to be adopted for approval here.
Okay. I'm going to ask one question about that real quick, and then we'll go to the rest of the reports, and then do the rest of the questions. But as a legal matter, just because the only portion of the amendments from the sponsor that has any sort of like debatability that has already come up, obviously already, is the commission portion. Is that a legally required portion in order for law to
No.
approve? Okay.
No,
Just
not
so
at
that
all.
I know that up front if we're having any discussion about
That's
whether
a
or not to
policy.
do that. Okay,
Policy
thank
matter.
you. Okay, Department of Finance.
Hi, good afternoon. Bob Senemy, Deputy Finance Director representing Department of Finance. And we have a bunch of comments on this and acknowledge for the sponsor that some of this is foreseen an eventual ordinance. We wanted to get our concerns kind of down in all in one place, just so folks understand where we're coming from with where this could go. I would first say that I don't think it's a mystery to this body that we generally don't like special revenue funds. I think it's worth just repeating again why we have that point of view, just so folks can kind of understand where we're coming from. The danger with setting aside these separate funds is that, you end up blocking off revenues for a very particular purpose and on a permanent basis. Better practice, we think, is to have all the revenues kind of come centrally into the general fund, and then you have an annual budget process where you figure out where that money is spent. I used to hear arguments in the past from council, like we have to have these special funds because we don't have any power in the budget process. But, we have to acknowledge the council can move money around in the budget process now. So if all revenues are coming centrally, council can propose amendments if they, want to move money from one activity to something like what the sponsor is suggesting for neighborhood grants. That's something that the council at least can try to do in the budget process now. The other thing is when you have these special funds, it limits the city's ability to react to changing economic conditions or needs. What is a big priority one year might not be the same priority 8 years, 10 years, 12 years down the road, or even 2 years out. I can tell you a lot of things that the city thought were a priority all of a sudden changed when we had COVID because we had a loss of revenue. And in those situations, I can tell you having money sitting in other special funds is not good for the city overall. And puts a lot of priority on, even more fundamental basic city services that we provide and has the ability to impact those. So again, this concern is not directed to this proposal specifically. We've had a lot of similar kind of funds come up in this regard, and we've had similar concerns about all of those. For this particular proposal, I wanted to explain first how parking revenues work in the city. So basically the way it works is that all of our parking revenues, parking-related revenues and expenses all run through something called a parking management fund, and then any net proceeds comes to the general fund. So by parking-related revenues, this could be things like meter revenue, which we're talking about here, parking fines, garage income, parking tax, all of that flows through our parking funds. There's expenses charged to those funds, which includes enforcement, which is largely our TOs and DOT, garage management costs, maintenance costs of our parking garages, allocations for administration for parking authority, for example, and debt service cost on borrowing what we've done in the past to build or improve some of these garages. In the general fund this year, in the 27 budget, there's a net of about $23 million of proceeds that comes through and comes back to the general fund. So we're really earning, when you take all of our parking revenues and expenses combined, we're actually earning $23 million and bringing that back into the general fund. You know, the first concern we have is about diverting revenues or adding new expenses. I hear the I hear the sponsor say that the idea of this is that it would be incremental, that it wouldn't be an effect on the general fund. But I would argue that gets a little bit tricky of what's incremental and not. You know, depending on how the boundaries of these districts are drawn or how the times are allocated of what time is new enforcement, you know, it's possible that you could draw the boundaries in a way or the times that there could be some current revenue that gets diverted away. I understand that's not the intent, but again, the devil's in the details in terms of like, are the boundaries drawn in a way or the time set up so that we don't do any enforcement at those times. That kind of relates to a second concern is around the administration of something like this. You know, tagging revenues by time and by parking benefit district, and then having the resources to basically bring in those revenues, have to program the system so that we know which ones belong to which district, putting them in a separate fund, then allocating the resources to where it goes. You know, it's something that could be done, but we have to acknowledge that there is an administrative cost with that that could come with some additional cost in terms of new people that could dilute the revenue or the amount of money that would go back for the purpose of the fund. Likewise, if we had new meter hours, there would need to be some enforcement of those hours. And so today, if, for example, and I'm making this up, for example, if we're only enforcing a meter in a certain neighborhoods through 6 p.m. and we expand the hours, and the intent is for those additional hour revenues to go into a separate fund, we would have to send, enforcement officers to enforce those hours. And today, those enforcement hours all get charged to the parking fund and the net proceeds come to the general fund. So it is a little bit tricky to kind of figure out like which revenues were truly there before, which revenues are new versus what enforcement is baseline versus what is new. I would argue as the one that probably would have to figure that out, it gets a little bit trickier when you get into the details of trying to figure out what that looks like. The other thing I want to remind folks is that our parking revenues are currently pledged to debt service on prior issuance of parking revenue bonds. And just again, going through the example here, you know, in fiscal 27, I said we had a net of about $23 million of proceeds that come back to the general fund. If you go back and look at the 2021 budget during COVID, that number turned negative. So that number was a negative 14.5 million. That means that the general fund at that time was subsidizing those debt service costs. And this is why the special fund becomes problematic, because I remember during COVID, we got a lot of nervous phone calls. I got a lot of nervous phone calls from rating agencies and our bond counsel of like, hey, you guys pledged parking revenues to be able to pay for this debt service. What are you going to do given the situation? Ultimately, we chose to continue to make those payments because we felt that was the right thing to do for our overall bond rating. But if you divert any revenues away, it does have the potential to impact the next time you go to market to issue debt, to issue revenue bonds for something like this. And you know, our capital budget this year includes capital costs. We expect to go to market for the first time in many years to do improvements to our parking garages. And we generally pledge all those parking revenues to say we're going to use those revenues to first pay off the debt service, and only extras would go to the general fund. So we do, the concern around diverting money away from the general fund is associated with it. We do pledge those revenues to first pay the debt. I don't know what the rating agencies would say about this specific proposal. They wouldn't love it. I can't say that I've talked to them specifically about it, but generally when we pledge all those revenues that first are available for that, it does cause concern sometimes when money gets diverted to other purposes, and that could impact our rating and the cost to borrow additional money. And then, you know, last I would just emphasize those administrative costs. I can think of a lot of tasks that would need to be done. You'd have to draw the boundaries, tag the revenues or the meters, you know, by district. You would have to reprogram your systems to kind of set all that up. We'd have to allocate our cost of enforcement officers to kind of baseline versus new. You'd have to collect the revenue, separate it by fund. You'd have to disperse the dollars. Again, I'm not saying that's impossible to do, but it's a lot of administrative work to go through for $1 million or $1 to $2 million. When, you know, if that revenue, if we chose that we wanted to expand our enforcement, that money could come to the general fund and we could choose to allocate in the budget or make the decision, and the council would have the right to attempt or to propose to move money around to fund the things that the sponsor is wanting to spend that money on. So I know that some of this is not just around the creation of the fund, but further down, if there was a follow-up ordinance around this, those would be some of the concerns that we would have about, potential impact to the general fund. So we wanted to at least just get them on paper now and hear them now before this bill moves forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Parking Authority.
Good afternoon, David Rhodes for the Parking Authority and General Counsel. Speaking on behalf of Peter Little, who's currently on a plane. I want to thank the
Can you
chair
pull that
for-
microphone down just a couple
Sure.
inches?
I want to thank the chair for speaking to Shoup and the Bible of parking.
dog?
And, yeah,
That was his website.
a decent summary. Also, thank you, Bob, for mentioning the bonds as part of our report. With all that said, I just want to stick to the meter purpose questions and our issues with, excuse me for reading from our report, but on short notice and speaking on behalf of Pete Little, I'll make sure I speak for him exactly. So the purpose of parking meters is to manage parking, creating availability of on-street parking for patrons of businesses and attractions in commercial areas. Revenue collection is ancillary to that purpose. If the purpose of parking meters is turned upside down, focusing on increasing revenue collection instead of good parking management practices, the intent of the meter program is distorted, thereby eroding support from the public at large for the parking meter program. Parking meters should only be installed on blocks where they are needed to manage parking in commercial areas. The city would likely be pressured by neighborhoods with parking benefits districts to install parking meters where they are not really needed to generate more revenue for the neighborhood. Parking meters should only operate when they are needed to manage parking in commercial areas. The city would likely be pressured by neighborhoods with parking benefits districts to extend parking meter hours of operation to hours when they are not really needed to generate more revenue for the neighborhood. Parking meter rates should be the lowest rate necessary to create an average of 1 or 2 available parking spaces on each block face. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The city would likely be pressured by neighborhoods with parking benefits districts to increase parking meter rates beyond what is really needed to generate more revenue for the neighborhood. And neighborhoods with parking benefits districts may demand ever-increasing enforcement of parking meter compliance in order to realize incremental additional funding. At some point, there will be diminishing returns on additional enforcement, with the city spending more on that enforcement than it gains in additional parking meter revenue. These demands might also draw enforcement away from other important parking enforcement functions. That's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you. DOT.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Luciano Diaz testifying for DOT. As the primary agency tasked with parking enforcement, DOT is concerned of potential impacts to its operations. To first echo finance concerns, parking revenue is deposited into a parking fund, which supports our enforcement activities. The revenue set aside as part of this bill would take precedence over parking enforcement costs, which may necessitate transfers from the general fund and result in net losses to the city. That said, we appreciate the sponsor's interest in keeping this revenue neutral. Next, on parking concerns. This may increase demand for enforcement. Community demand for additional local funding could result in more parking meters or longer operating hours. And this would need longer hours of enforcement, which may not turn out to be revenue neutral. For those reasons, we are respectfully opposed to this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. BDC.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Tom Welly on behalf of the BDC. While we support the policy goals outlined in the bill, while BDC will have no hand in shouldering the operational or administrative burden outlined here, we respectfully defer to our colleagues at the Department of Finance. Thank you.
Thank you. Massenbad.
Good afternoon, Director Christopher Lundy on behalf of Small and Minority Business Advocacy and Development, and we stand by our report as submitted.
Which says what?
We're without recommendation.
Thank you. DHCD.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Stephanie Murdoch on behalf of the Department of Housing and Community Development. This bill would have minimal fiscal or operational impact on the agency. Therefore, we stand by our bill report, which is in deference to the Parking Authority. Thank you.
Thank you. I will I'm going to go to not the sponsor first. Councilman Jones, any questions for our agencies?
I guess, yes. Questions for DOT. I guess the major reason you mentioned you were opposed of it is in regards to needing additional enforcement, but then in other testimonies it mentioned that like the funds would have to come out for the enforcement of it. So we aren't sure, just trying to get clarification. Would DOT be responsible for the enforcement, or would the money end up coming out of the funds that are collected from the total?
To my understanding, all of the parking enforcement is funded by the parking fund, which receives its revenues from like those parking meters, as an example. And the concern that our administration shared was if the increased revenue from parking meters does not equate to or exceed the cost of that additional enforcement, that difference would have to come out of the fund. And if that difference exceeds the amount of money in the fund, transfers may have to be made from outside the fund to cover the cost of enforcement.
So, and I guess that funds would come from DOT if it wasn't enough to cover.
Yeah, I think the way we think of this is all of the TOs sit in the parking fund today. So if you had these, today, if you added additional cost into that fund, the net proceeds flow through the general fund. So there would be some administrative kind of work to figure out what is baseline enforcement versus what hours are or resources are being added to take neighborhood A from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. or to take neighborhood B from enforcement from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. or whatever it might be. Today, all those costs are in the parking fund, all the revenues are in the parking fund. It's very simple. They all flow through. If there's net proceeds, it comes to the general fund. In tomorrow's world, with this proposal, you'd have to kind of parcel off these revenues that are truly incremental, and you'd also have to parcel off the additional enforcement that's needed to make sure you collect the revenue. If you don't send enforcement out, people eventually are not going to feed the meter, so you'd have to have some enforcement to make sure people paid the meter revenue in those new hours.
And just as a follow-up, is there any like numbers that's being done on like how much time or how much revenue need to be collected to make it kind of net neutral? So that I know usually traditionally they operate at a profit, but just trying to like, what does it take at what point in order to be profitable?
Yeah, we hadn't done that work yet, because that would depend on the specific proposal of like what hours or what boundaries were there. So we didn't want to speculate on how much could be generated until we had more specifics on the proposal. But, presumably if you expand the hours, you're going to generate some revenue, but you're going to have some cost to enforce it. And the question becomes, is it net enough to make it worth it, to pursue something like this?
Got it. And just last question, maybe for finance. Outside, I know you mentioned during COVID that we didn't collect enough revenue in order to pay for the debt. Has there been any other instances outside of that which it's come close or?
So I'd have to go back and look. I know that first COVID year it was negative. I believe for a year or two after that, it was either negative or just close to kind of net neutral. I remember when we came to hearings during those days when we reported on our projections, we would say, our tourist revenues aren't enough to kind of pay off some of the costs, given that there was so much less activity in downtown and kind of vicinity. So that's the only one I'm aware of, like pre-COVID, and now that we're kind of back to normal, for lack of a better word, you tend to generate net resources out of that fund that flow through to the general fund. But there was a period there, I would say COVID and the immediate aftermath, that we weren't generated enough to pay for all those expenses. And again, the debt service is fixed. The garage expenses are largely fixed. The enforcement, capacity can kind of grow or decline based on the demand. But for that period of time, we went negative on those revenues. And like I said, I remember during that time, we got
we got asked by our lenders, do you intend to continue these debt service costs if your parking revenues are falling off the map and you don't have them? There was, a lot of concerns about, would we get downgraded? Are we still making a commitment to pay those now that the parking revenues evaporated basically overnight? So I think that's our concern going forward is would there be, concern from those entities around diverting or having additional revenue get diverted into another source.
Got it. Thank you. And no, not my, you go.
I'll just note that from what I continue to see, to the extent that we actually create parking enforcement, we continue to generate substantial revenue that exceeds the cost of that parking enforcement. I mean, just in the last several months, we've been closely monitoring parking enforcement on a 5-block stretch of Charles Street that was not happening with any consistency before. And from one type of fine alone among the 5 different things that we're issuing fines for, from just the parking, from the bus stop and bus lane violations alone, we're generating now $15,000 in tickets every week for about 3 labor hours of work. And so, and that's just the tickets that we're issuing for parking in bus stops and bus lanes. And there is as many tickets easily being issued for meter violations and fire hydrant violations and no stopping area violations at the same time. And so that $15,000 is, representative of only a portion of the labor that's going into just this one 5-block span for just a few hours each week. So, Councilman Bullock.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Follow up for Parking Authority. I know part of the conversation we've been having thus far is around parking meters, and then, as you mentioned, there may be a desire to have additional meters installed or what have you. My question is, how often or how recently have meters been installed? I'm just curious in terms of how you ascertain whether there's a need for meters at a particular location or particular thoroughfare, and how recently have any new meters been installed?
I'm going to have to defer a little bit to our Chief of Operations, but I will say this, that we are constantly out there looking at meter placements, new placements, removals, et cetera. Candace, do you have anything to say? Fran? Thank you.
Fran Brunsinski with the Parking Authority. Like David was mentioning, we were always kind of updating the equipment and changing it out. There haven't been any major initiatives to, like Baltimore Peninsula, for instance, or Harbor Point to meter an area, but Harbor Point would be one of the more recent ones where so that was within the past few years.
Got it. That's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just trying to look this up quickly, but Bob, how much, don't we use HUR also to be funding our TOs?
No,
We don't use any HUR to fund our TOs.
I don't believe so.
I thought that we do use some, and now I get that we have a little HUR problem that we have to deal with. I get that. But my understanding was that we did pay for some of
The budget, sorry.
Go ahead, that's fine.
The budget tends to, like as a practice, identify more HUR eligible expenses than the amount of HUR that we're actually going to get, so that it's clear that we get this amount of money and we can at least spend all of that on HUR, so that we don't actually have to go, the HUR money is going here and the other money is going here. Basically, the HUR money becomes a contributor to a pot that's larger than that of HUR eligible expenses. So it's not really something that we clearly track. HUR dollar comes in, HUR dollar goes out. It just becomes a contributor to a bigger pot of HUR eligible expenses.
There's a whole list of all the HUR things that we spend on. I'm trying to find it real quick in the executive summary.
Yep. I know what you're referring to, but I think per Councilman's point, we have to make sure that we have more eligible expenses than actual money received. And so, I mean, at first glance, I think those enforcement officers probably would be eligible, but they're not counted now because they sit in the parking fund. And there's a list of eligible, I know with the report you're referring to, it's in the revenue section under HUR, shows what are the expenses that we plan to charge against HUR in order to show the state that we're not diverting the money for other purposes.
Right, I'm trying to find it here because I thought I had seen it in the list of eligible expenses. And again, I acknowledge that we have a large HUR problem that we have to resolve in the next General Assembly.
Right.
But wanted to just make the point that there's, other ways that we're going to be able to utilize the dollars. But as a follow-up, and I think, Mr. Chair, you alluded to this in terms of there are so many ways that we could do this. We could add hours, or we could add a dollar amount. Like the Waverly lot is, I don't know why it's like 35 cents an hour. That's bananas to me. We should absolutely be charging more. I wouldn't probably increase the hours, but we could absolutely add a quarter to it, which doesn't at all say anything about the enforcement part. So there's different ways that we can do this, and there's the ordinance would figure it out based on all of the concerns that have been brought here, so that what's being talked about here wouldn't necessarily be the impact of the actual charter amendment when we're going to work this out later. But we could put in some statements about, in which the sponsor had already put in an amendment to talk about like not touching the bond revenues for the bonds and things like that. So if there was some way to, clarify that this, that the general fund is the baseline, and then anything above that would go into this fund as a general principle, right, to clarify, and then the ordinance would get the details, would that help in terms of your thinking?
Wouldn't for mine, because it's the same, whether you earmark a certain amount or say just the boundaries here, it's still the same issue that you're taking money that could go to the general fund and putting it for another purpose. Again, going back to my original points, we think the best practice, especially in a place like this that has, high taxes, extreme needs, best practice is to put all those revenues into the general fund and then use a budget process to decide where those go. We have other special funds. I mean, this one would go towards neighborhood grants. We have one for affordable housing. We have a youth fund. We have a bunch of special funds. Nobody is opposed to spending on neighborhoods or affordable housing or on youth. But I can tell you, when you have a financial crisis like we did with COVID and we had the prior decade, all of a sudden things look a lot different. And I can tell you from having sat in the room with decision makers over those years, every single mayor I've served for, when we put the budget decisions in front of them, they say, why did we divert all these monies and have them in these separate funds when we're trying to make, choices on critical city services? I can tell you every single mayor, including ones that were on the council before they became mayor, they look, when they get on that side, they're like, why do we have all these monies, portioned off? So it wouldn't change our opinion on that. It's still the principle of you don't want to just dedicate something to a purpose because, again, conditions change, economic conditions change, needs change, priorities change over time. You want to have at least some flexibility. And again, I would argue that if this was a priority in the budget, the council could propose an amendment to say we want to take $2 million from Service A and move it over to neighborhood grants for these particular communities. I mean, that's something that can be done, or at least can be proposed by the council in any given year.
Which we're doing, not quite 2 million, but it's a little less than $1 million, but, and it's for one specific purpose. It's not for, all of this. I mean, one of the things that we're challenged with is trying to come up with other funding sources. One of the amendments is to give us, the council, authority to come up with the funding source to be able to put into this fund, similar to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. We're not dictating what that is right now. We're not saying a percentage of the budget, which we all agree is not the way to go. But we're just trying to be creative here relative to, a fund, as the chair had said, where, we've all been struggling to figure out like a commuter tax or something. We've got to just be creative, and that's what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, if I may, Tyler Schnella.
Tyler Schnella from the mayor's office.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for that, Councilman Ramos, and I think that we understand the intent of why the councilman wants to do this, right? I don't think that there's a single person in this room that you've heard from today that has said that we don't want to see increased investment in our neighborhoods to the extent of some of the items that are listed here. But for a lot of this, there are already programs that are operating that these neighborhoods can, receive the benefit of. BDC and Downtown Partnership do a lot of this already. And so, that is an avenue. I think that you heard from the city administrator during budget hearings that we do have an overdependence on the revenue that we get from property taxes. And we do need to be looking to diversify the revenue that the city receives. We just don't believe that we should be doing anything that restricts any further funding into these kind of special funds or lock boxes, if you will. I think that there's merit to, do you add a quarter or a dollar or something on top of it, right? And I think that is something that we can absolutely, and we should have a conversation about. But this legislation in its current form, the administration does not support. But we are open to conversations with the sponsor and any other member of this committee to talk through, what, if anything, we can do to do something to this effect. But we don't believe that this is the way to do it.
I have really a lot of trouble with that statement, actually, because the wholesale opposition to the idea of segregating any funds for any purposes, making a fiscal decision, a fiscal policy decision to dedicate certain revenues to certain uses is cut and dry. And this is, all due respect to the realities of like best practices for putting everything in a pot and allowing it to be budgeted out as needed on an annual basis in consideration of current needs and priorities, this is also a best practice to dedicate specific funds to a specific use. And it cannot exist unless, it cannot be implemented as a best practice unless the fiscal policy decision is made to dedicate certain revenues to certain purposes. And so I struggle to understand how there can be like an interest in working on some version of this that gets past the blanket opposition to the idea of segregating any funds for any purpose at all.
I wouldn't say that we have blanket opposition.
I would. Everything I've ever heard from the administration and the finance department is blanket opposition to it. Everything that Bob Senemy has said here today is blanket opposition to it.
Okay. Well, I don't agree with that. And there is a lot of need in this city, right? I mean, look at the repaving that we're able to do. There could be more if we did something like this and the money went to repaving our streets, right? What we're saying is for these uses that are laid out here, there are already revenue sources for this. There are already programs that are operated for beautifying neighborhoods, for improving public safety, for facade improvement, tenant build out, property acquisition. It's just when we get requests from the council to do things like create more traffic engineers or more TEOs, right? Like we have to pay for those things, and that comes out of the general fund. The more money that goes into the general fund that you set aside, the less money that is on the table when those decisions need to be made to make sure that we have enough traffic engineers for traffic calming, to make sure that we have enough TEOs to do traffic enforcement up to and including enforcing the meters. I hear you on the feedback around, our general posture on non-lapsing funds. I mean, we do agree that they should be rare and they should be deliberate. But but there will be opportunities, I think, where, you know, where there's consensus amongst the council and agreement with the administration that for a specific purpose, sure, we can set aside some dollars to do a specific thing, but we should be in active conversation about that. I think the councilman was right in his statements earlier. He brought this to us when he first got on the council, and we shared our concerns around the equity pieces of this, and at that time, we did move forward. Again, we can have conversations. We had a conversation last night around meter and enforcement in Federal Hill in general, that I think that there's some merit to that we'll be discussing with Councilman Blanchard and his team about, and I think that as a part of that conversation, we can also talk about, you know, what the councilman is trying to achieve with respect to this, and how that could be, you know, possibly built into that.
I have never, ever heard this administration voice an equity concern about the existence of the downtown partnership, the waterfront partnership, the Charles Village Benefits District, the Midtown Benefits District, and they are exactly the same as this. They say we should be able to identify an increase in revenue from a specific area and put it into investment back into that area through a dedicated community partner who is responsible for doing that, and make that area, empower that area to improve itself. I've never heard the administration voice an equity issue over that, and it's the exact same principle. Okay, Councilman Blanchard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think my sense with both the parking authority and DOT is these are largely things that can be covered via an ordinance. And so I'd like to focus the conversation with finance and with MOGR. For Mr. Sinema, so the revenues for the parking, what's the actual term? The Parking Enterprise Fund. So just FY26, a little under 11 million was from meter revenue. About 61 million was for everything else. Are parking fines part of that additional?
They are.
Okay. And so I think it was like 15 million or so in that, for that amount.
I'd have to pull it up, but yeah, it's the revenues in those parking funds. It's parking fines, it's garage income, it's meter revenue, it's parking tax.
Yeah.
Pretty much everything.
Several different parking related things going in there. Yeah. So, and I think people are catching on where I'm going here, right? That if you create new meter hours, either extend the hours, put new meters in, or do it on Sundays or whatever, you are creating a demand for enforcement, theoretically, although I sit on the Parking Authority's board, and there's certainly a sentiment that the city hasn't been super interested in actually enforcing parking meters for quite some time. But assuming that is the case, when you go and enforce the meters, you make money that then does go directly into the parking fund. And so I guess the way we would be in a position of like losing money here would be if you have all these new meters and you have a bunch of enforcement and you don't have a bunch of fines. And so that seems less likely than a second round of a pandemic. And I mean that not cheekily, it seems pretty likely that if you actually have find some neighborhood that could use parking meters or whatever, and you put them in, and you actually go and enforce it, that it's a net loss in the cost of the TOs versus the fine revenue. That's not to say that, I'm not arguing for this for the sake of, hey, we can generate some fine revenue. I'm just saying that the risk of this being a burden on the parking fund and therefore impacting the general fund is, I think, really dramatically offset by the fact that parking fine revenue is also going into it. So I just want to note that now as far as, but I do think that with finance, there's probably an opportunity to come up with, we already had the First Amendment in there to try to help address these concerns. And I think there's probably, and I think Councilwoman Ramos was alluding to it, something along the lines of, in the event that the parking fund goes net negative in a given year or whatever, right, like then the funds would not be distributed. We are talking about a couple $1 million out of $5.1 billion budget, so it seems like small potatoes from the general fund perspective. But I think there's a way to cover both that, to say like in the event that, I guess you'd say the parking fund is net negative, whatever what happened during COVID. And then you could also require some amount of the revenue, because there will be some demand on probably the parking authority and, you know, maybe elsewhere, to be paid for as an administrative fee, right? Like an 8%, 6% fee or something like that. So it was 6%? Yeah. So the precedent from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, 6%. So I think that, I think there's a way that even with finance's really, I think, pessimistic sense of the possible outcomes here, there's a way we can really continue to protect against that in the charter amendment, so that way the administration can remove that concern as they're thinking through these opportunities. And I'm looking forward to having those conversations in the next couple of days, and hopefully we can get that amendment drafted up on that one. For Mr. Stella, and this being, right, we're talking, there's the fund and then there's the ordinance. And I want to first make a brief argument for why, for different reasons, non-lapsing funds are, different types of non-lapsing funds are important for different types of reasons. And then I want to ask how we might be able to assuage some of, you know, MGR's concerns. Let's use the Fair Election Fund, right? A huge problem with having a fair election fund that we are not funding with a recurring revenue source is that when incumbent elected officials are thinking about whether they want to be publicly financed or traditionally financed, and they look at a non-guaranteed revenue stream, that's really not an appealing thing to say, well, I hope it's gonna be financed, right? But I'm not gonna know until July before the primary, right? So that's a good example of why you need to have a guaranteed revenue stream to make the actual fund work, or that type of idea work properly. With a parking benefits district, I know probably better than anyone, or pretty well, Baltimoreans really don't love when you touch their parking stuff, you know. I've had plenty of conversations on this over the last year, actually, and my whole time I lived in the city. What makes a parking benefits district politically feasible is that some amount of the revenue is being pumped back into the place that is generating the revenue, right? It's not going to the general fund, right? So I get from finance perspective of it's sort of always more flexible to never have funds and everything's in the general fund. But the way that parking benefits districts address the hyper-local political issue of making people pay for parking. And so I just think there's a real reason politically, on top of all the other reasons why I think this is a good idea. I think it works better. Question, do you have any sense, besides the amendments, which obviously the agencies haven't had a chance to look at it, it's all very quick, and besides the kind of couple ideas that Mr. Sinema and I just talked through, of how we can get to yes with the administration on this fund?
I don't have that for you right now. I would say, let me sit with the amendments and I was reading the unofficial reprint here, and have some additional conversations and get back to you on that.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Can I ask one question? So I think in the first reader, there was something about, or maybe this was just my recollection of the conversation, but 50% of the funds will go to the nearest Main Street or Business Improvement District. That is off, that is not in this anymore.
So that was kind of the idea I had from a couple years of having conversations around like
what it would look
equity
like.
and everything. Like that seemed like a good idea to balance it. It's not been written down. That would be in the ordinance presumably.
Okay.
A couple things that really stand out to me that I think bear some acknowledgement is, one, we heard from Parking Authority that the purpose of meters is to manage parking demand. It's not to generate revenue, it's to manage parking demand. I should ask a question. Do we monitor the intake of each individual meter in the city? Or do we monitor the intake of geographic groups of meters as separate from other geographic groups of meters in the city?
I would say we do both. All of our meters are smart meters, and they all report to us how much revenue.
We don't have any like twisty, put the coin in.
We're rid of all of those, am I correct? Yeah.
And so, okay, so we are able to monitor the intake of revenue at a small geographic level. And I actually know that because I've asked about the revenues in part of the Lauraville Main Street, not the whole Lauraville Main Street, just a portion of the Lauraville Main Street before. Being able to manage parking at all in an area depends on the ability to monitor that intake of revenue. But compared to what we find when doing enforcement, there has to be a link in analysis between the enforcement that we know is going into an area, time and volume of enforcement, compared to the revenues that are being generated, without which we can't determine how many people are parking in an area and not paying the meters at all. And without which we can't really set meter rates based on demand management. Is that an accurate summary?
Absolutely.
And so any conversation here about the idea that having a parking benefits district being the reason that we would have to add or increase parking enforcement really forgets the idea that we wouldn't have a parking benefits district in an area where we didn't have to manage demand in the first place, because there wouldn't be metered parking in an area that didn't need it. And so the existence of a parking benefits district cannot in and of itself require additional parking enforcement. It is whether or not we have metered parking that really determines whether or not enforcement has to happen and at what level in order to monitor that. I mean, that's a pretty fair summary?
It's close. I think the only issue then would be if you're extending hours beyond when parking needs to be managed and then enforcing those hours. That's the only issue, I think.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and the concept of a benefits district is, as you said, you sell this to the business owners in the area by saying, look, if instead of your Main Street and your block of shops being a free-for-all where people can park free or cheaper than what the market would demand or bear, we're going to set rates at what we think they should be to manage the demand so that people turn around and come into your businesses more frequently, or stay only as long as they need to stay so that other customers can come into your business and make the space for them to do that. The way we sell that to those businesses then is by saying, and a little bit of this money is going to come back to you. And so we wouldn't ever have need of a benefits district if we didn't have some sort of increase or some portion that we otherwise wouldn't be getting. And so at a time when we would be doing parking enforcement anyway, because the demand needs to be managed, the demand needs to be enforced at that time. So I just don't see there's any world where the enforcement becomes this thing that's being spent on without a direct benefit to the city coming from it at the same time. And generally a benefit to the city that is proportionally larger than the benefit that goes to the benefits district. I guess the main principle of consideration here for me is, do we believe in the concept of a parking benefits district? If we believe in the concept of it and want to ask the voters of the city, do you believe in the concept of a parking benefits district? That enables us to, at a later date, have this level of granular policy debate over whether or not, or what the very fine kind of details of how that works are when it comes to an ordinance at a later date. But we preclude ourselves from even having that policy, granular level implementation discussion if we can't even ask, do the voters of Baltimore City believe generally in the concept of a parking benefits district? Because without passing this onto the ballot and putting that to the voters, there's never going to be a discussion about how we actually implement this thing, and how we actually implement this thing cannot be in the ballot question, because ballot questions themselves cannot, should not, are inappropriate if they include in them that level of policy. And so the two really have to be separated. Do we believe in the concept of a parking benefits district? And do we want to ask the voters, do they believe in the concept? If so, then it is on us, the policymakers of the city, to debate and let the chips fall where they lie on the finer details of how that gets implemented.
Yeah, and Mr.
Tyler
Chair,
Schnella.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the only thing that I would add to that is, I don't want the framing that comes out of this hearing to be like based on the how you frame what the two kind of pressing questions are, to be that the administration does not support parking benefits district or the idea of putting that to the voters. Had the original charter amendments moved as they may, as they were originally drafted with the non-lapsing funds, the intent was not to put the creation of a parking benefits district to the voters. The intent was to allow the non-lapsing funds charter amendment to pass and allow the council to create non-lapsing funds by ordinance. This parking benefits district fund would have been created by an ordinance, not for the voters to decide. It would have been for the council to decide. We're now being asked to whether we agree to put this to the voters, because the measure that would have allowed it to not have to go to the voters is no longer in the charter amendments. So like, I don't want it to be framed as if we are now trying to stop a question from going to, and that's not how this originated.
All due respect, you cannot have it both ways. The administration has taken the position that we, the people who are voted to be the chief policymakers of the city, should not have the ability to set certain fiscal policy, even though that's a standard legislating lane for virtually all legislative bodies. And despite the fact that the inclusion of non-lapsing funds in general in a city charter is an inappropriate policy matter to have in a city charter. But we've been told that the only thing that the administration accepts is the idea that this thing that is inappropriate to have in a charter should not be allowed to us to be a policy decision, and that we have to push that policy decision on to the voters, and that that's the only way the administration thinks it's meeting a reasonably high standard of scrutiny. And so then when we come to say, okay, then let the voters determine whether or not such a thing should be something that the city council can make a more granular decision about, we're told, no, we also shouldn't let it go to the voters. You can't have it both ways.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to evaluate the proposal and take a posture on it. I think that what I said earlier was that we'll go back and have a conversation with the sponsor.
Right, and what I'm saying is, what I hear is that the position is all about what could potentially happen if the city council essentially put to you later an ordinance that is irresponsible, instead of saying, do we believe in the concept of a parking benefits district? And should we allow the voters to decide whether we can determine how parking benefits districts should work?
Yes.
And instead, we're being told, we don't exactly oppose the idea, but we don't know if we oppose the idea. We don't know, we don't support the idea. And we don't know if we can figure out how to maybe support the idea.
Well, this is where we are right now in our posture. I said that we'll have a conversation with the sponsor, and we'll go from there.
Okay. Councilman Blanchard, what would you like to have happen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to briefly note that just the parking authority concerns on like best practices here. I think that is these things about how these things should be done I think that could be put into an ordinance for, just as an example of like, so you're not doing some crazy thing that leads to some bad outcome and is not best practice. If it makes everyone feel more confident, I think that could probably be legislated in the ordinance down the road. I think we might have a path on the finance side with the protections. We'll work on drafting those amendments and get back and look forward to that conversation. Look forward to continuing the conversation with the mayor's office as a whole. The amendments, I think for the most part, were not super interesting. I would certainly like for the committee, I'd appreciate my colleagues' thoughts on having a commission versus having a, just sort of an algorithm of here's how this stuff would be distributed to the entities that would spend it. Because that is one of the amendments. I can see both sides. I'd like to hear my colleagues' thoughts on that.
I have a thought on that. I do want, before I forget, on the drafting side of things, we'll come right back to that, Councilman. the last bit, it uses the number 1, where I wonder why it doesn't use the word
Would the chair be specific with the page and line number?
Yes. I'm sorry, I'm flipping through too many pages here. I keep forgetting how everything in here is ordered. Okay, on the first reader,
Page 2, line 29.
yes. Is that still in with the amendments?
I don't have a copy of the amendments. I left them on my desk by accident.
This is section 21D22. Let's see, with the amendments in the unofficial reprint, I said 21D is now an advisory commission, so this is the section permitted uses. And it's structured differently. I see, okay.
We're striking
It's
lines
struck-
28 through 30 in their entirety in Amendment 6 on page 3 of 4 of the amendments.
Okay.
It goes away if you
Okay.
adopt the amendments.
It's a kind of differently structured thing. Okay. I also wanted to note one other thing you reminded me of in the Parking Authority's report. It touches on the potential for administrative burden. And one of the reasons I was asking before about the monitoring of specific revenues from specific meters is, ostensibly the way this works is we say the meters in this area, some percentage of the revenue that is generated from those meters goes to this entity. And the city serves as a pass-through for that. The exact same thing that happens when we increase an increment on the property taxes in special benefits districts. And again, just like I said before, I've never heard the administration say there was an equity issue with the administration or the existence of special benefits districts like Midtown. I've never heard the idea that the ability to say, this is how much money came in property taxes from that increment in that benefits zone, and we're passing it over as a pass-through to that's an administrative burden that should be considered like a reason to oppose the existence of those benefits districts. I'm not
Mr.
wrong
Chair,
here, right? Bob?
I think I hear what you're saying on the analogy. I would just remind you that each of those districts, they have a separate surcharge. There is an additional administrative burden to manage those. There's a separate bill that goes out, so there's additional costs there. Separate bill has to be sent with that surcharge to each district. The money comes into the city has to take that money and remit it. So it is a similar scenario. But
It sounds like the special benefits districts are actually more burdensome than this. If we just say parking authority, how much money came in from these meters here? Okay, percentage, send it to that entity there.
It's hard to say. I mean, I'd say it's similar.
Yeah, okay.
But there is an additional administrative burden, just to be clear. There's a separate bill that goes out, separate collections. This is a little different because the meter revenue, you would have to kind of say, well, only meter revenue generated after this time, or only in this area, or these meters tagged would go to that. So there'd be some programming to make sure that revenue could get set aside separately. For the special benefits district, there's actually a separate bill that goes out. So there was work to set up those districts. Those districts have been around for a while. There might have been, disagreement, or that point might have been made when they set those up originally. It hasn't really come up in recent years because they're in practice now and they're used. But I hear you on the point that it's similar. But I just want to be clear, there are additional costs that the city bears to do that, to set that up. And
I guess
the benefits districts don't pay for that.
Right, I guess my concern is, again, that's something that we could probably work out and take into consideration as the department's feedback at the ordinance level when we're creating a parking benefits district. and not something that we would ever use as the reason to wholesale prohibit.
We weren't, just to be clear from my point of view, that point wasn't saying that's the reason to wholesale. Just wanted to note that there is additional cost and kind of thinking that has to go in, how it will be set up. And it's not zero. There's, some cost and resources that would have to be dedicated to that.
Thank you. Ben, did you have something to add?
I wanted to recommend a little bit of caution around the comparison between community benefits districts and this proposal.
Okay.
Section 63 of Article 2, which I just looked up, was passed by the General Assembly in 1994. The way that those districts are structured is that the individual voters in that district have to assent to being charged an increment above the regular rate on their property tax.
Yeah.
And that increment is put towards administration of a particular fund, and then for the payment of certain additional services above and beyond the baseline services provided by the city. The only reason why, and I think it's a bad choice to call them parking benefits districts, because they aren't until by ordinance we create a catchment area for meters. The notion of a benefits district is just that. We are electing to provide a certain amount of benefit and we're voting for that benefit. You are creating a special purpose fund in the charter through this particular amendment. In addition to that, you're also articulating that the council may elect to create a certain geographic area for that catchment and have that be directed in a particular fashion. So it's important because if ever challenged in the future, you don't have the authority to create a quote unquote parking benefits district. You have the authority to create a special fund. So just want to pause. And then also from the administration point also as well, these people for benefits districts are saying, yes, charge me more money. We'll take care of the costs.
Thank you. Okay, on the commission, thank you. Thank you. I'll let somebody else speak first. I just done a bunch.
It was my idea, so I'll just say, the rationale behind it was to try to at least have, if we don't have like a set formula in ordinance, that there would be a group of people that, similar to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, would come up with the plan. Where would it be? Where would the money be going? Because we've said here as a value, not necessarily in the charter amendment, that not all of the money would be going to the place that it is generated from. So there would need to be some mechanism to make those decisions, unless we put something in the ordinance. So if we say that we're going to come up with a set formula and not need a commission, that's fine. But the idea behind the commission was, again, to sort of, these will be funds that the voters have agreed that we need to do this. So I was thinking that we would have a set of folks that would, oversee the fund, similar to what we have in the reparations fund, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. The Children and Youth Fund is a little bit different. So that was the reason I had suggested it. Also, to really put a fine point on the equity piece, since that was mentioned by a couple of our members who are not on the committee, that group would make sure that additional, any other dollars that doesn't go to the, or however we do the formula, would still have an equity framework.
Thank
and
you.
I'm sorry, we would do the commission by ordinance rather than what we have in the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and the Reparations Fund, which is very much dictated in the charter amendment. The charter amendment says we have a certain amount of renters. I'm just using the Affordable Housing Trust Fund for a minute. Renters, developers, finance people, et cetera. We don't have time to discuss what that would look like. So to just say that we would figure that out in ordinance is what we have here. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilman Bullock. Councilman Jones? I guess my thought on the advisory commission is, if I'm not certain that there's an absolute need for it, it's not something I would be inclined to want to put into the charter, especially if I think when it comes to deciding that there is actually a parking benefits district anywhere at all in an ordinance, people are going to ask at that time, so the money from this Main Street area, this 3 blocks or this 10 blocks or whatever it is, some small portion of that is going to go to a special fund, you know, kind of like, and we already know like kind of the things that it can go to. And it specifically says for the following, it can be used for the following purposes within a parking benefits district, right? So we already know it's like money from Park Heights isn't going to Roland Park. It's going to, if we create a benefits district in Park Heights, it's going to the benefits district there in Park Heights. So, you know, I don't know. I don't understand.
I think that the idea, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, was that if as the sponsor was talking about this concept, which is not in the charter amendment, but one of the concepts of what the formula might look like is that, you know, 50% of it would go to the benefit district in which it was earned, and then the other portion of the revenue would go into would be distributed elsewhere in some other way. So that would, you know, that there would need to be some sort of entity that would help us with figuring what that looks like. Now, if we think that the council can come up with what that formula looks like, and at some point in time, there may be a new benefits district that then gets created to serve the purposes of, you know, the equity, maybe that's how we do it, but all I'm saying is that that was the original thought, was that there would be some pot of money if we do the formula that the councilman suggested, which is, again, not in the charter amendment, that there would need to be some oversight way of that, understanding where that money is going to go and how it's distributed. And that an oversight group would help to make sure that that was going to be distributed in an equitable format. That's where that came up from. If we decide that we're going to do a very solid formula that is going to have the equity framework, that's going to be inclusive of areas that are probably not designated main streets but have meters on them, how does that work? I mean, you know, I think that's all for discussion, and it's a may, by the way, and not a shall, I think. So we could put it in here as something that we're thinking about, but that it's not necessarily, you know, so I'm open to the discussion, but I do think that there's, in the principle of having, since these are voted on by the voters, that it's revenues that people are going to be providing, that there needs to be some sort of citizen resident, you know, input in that process of if there are sort of non-designated funds, how those funds would be used. Now, we don't know if there's going to be undesignated funds because we haven't figured out the formula, but that was the idea. And Mr. Chair, I have to go. I have to be at my daughter's school at 4 o'clock so she can celebrate her award-winning whatever she's going to win, and I need to go. Sorry. Thanks.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
If it just may briefly, the commission has no power.
Yeah.
Right, that's true.
To appropriate or to direct. They have the authority to recommend. The council shouldn't, especially not by charter, be improperly delegating their authority of oversight or to direct funds.
I wasn't thinking it would be direct funds. It would be advisory, similar to the trust fund.
It doesn't belong, it's improper charter material, which I know is your favorite thing.
Yeah, I love improper charter material.
Yeah.
I'm going to go to Councilman Blanchard. I'm just like, I believe in the city council as policymakers and as decision makers, and I believe in our executive agencies as good partner advisors and people who have expertise. And like, I can't envision a space where we go, look, finance is telling us it's like untenable for us to lop off this big a percentage and give it to that benefits district. If we create that benefits district, we really can't do more than this percentage of the revenues from that and make this workable. And we go, okay, that sounds reasonable. And then the benefits district can't exist unless we have somebody that's the recipient that money is going to be designated to in the first place, that's something that like gets baked into the creation of that benefits district in the first place. Like, what else is there to advise on a whole lot at that point at like a global city level? Because the organization that we would be directing this small amount of money to, a portion of the meter revenues from that area, that organization is going to have its own governance structure, and they're going to know like how to best put that money to use in their community. Like, is it like a painted crosswalk? Is it planters? Is it extra trash cans that they have private collection for? Is it facade improvement grants for some of the businesses in the area? Whatever it is, that entity is going to have their own governance thing. And I just don't see when like it just really comes down to like us legislating whether or not there should be a benefits district in a given area where an advisory commission really comes into particularly meaningful need, I guess. Councilman Blanchard, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I was going to make the same point that Ms. Guthorn was making. I don't think I really clarified it. It is an advisory commission and not, you know, making the final decisions on things. I'd have to stew over like what it might be like. I'd have to stew over what that kind of role could be, because this would presumably be like a mix of small business owners and different folks within current existing parking benefits districts who are like in a volunteer capacity. So they would have some unique perspectives on things, and they also would probably not be super familiar with all the things going on in the other places across the city, but that might be appropriate advisory capacity. I'll just note that I do think, and it's something I would probably like to talk with some of our colleagues who are not on the charter review committee, because I wouldn't be surprised if there's a couple colleagues who would feel better about having this as a part of the parking benefits district charter amendment. And if it, because, you know, different legislators have different philosophies of things. And if I think some of our colleagues would feel better knowing that there's kind of this like advisory commission giving feedback on a recurring basis, and they're, you know, factored in to consider equity amongst maybe a couple other things, like that might, even if it's like not really ideal charter material, it's important to get the support of our colleagues as well, and what they're factoring in here. So I think that's a little homework to do on my end, but I appreciate the feedback from everybody.
Okay, so we're not going to take a vote on this today. Okay. Just wanted to make sure that's what the sponsor is wanting here. Okay. We have to come back to this next week. I'd like to get resolution on anything we need resolution on, get alterations to amendments if we need it in any way before the end of this week. We have a very tight timeline if we're going to be able to do anything. Ideally, we would have this resolved before the council meeting on Monday, so that we don't have to double read the bill or anything like that. If we, because if we don't have it voted out of committee before the council meeting on Monday, then there's no possibility of getting this to the mayor before our deadline, unless it's double read.
Correct.
At the next meeting after that. But, you know, I think probably that's unrealistic, is to get it ready for Monday.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'd agree. I think the sense is that
We're going to come back to this
come
on
back
Wednesday.
at the same time, same place next week.
We're
yeah.
coming back here next Wednesday for the water bill again anyway, so I'm making the public announcement right now that we are going to bring this back next Wednesday at that same time. Thank you, everybody.